So welcome back guys to another casual lore session on a lazy Sunday lore. I am your host, Smotown, and for those unfamiliar, this is a series where I casually play the game, fail because I can't play and talk at the same time, and chat about some lore. So from a gameplay perspective, I've moved on quite a bit from last time. I'm now in the Crucifixion Woods, I've defeated the Crystal Sage Knight, and I'm level 34. So I've also managed to summon Uria by taking all of Yoel's free levels. And today, whilst we go into Farron's Keep, I want to talk about the war against the Abyss that is fought through time by the followers of the Fire, and was essentially started by Artorias and Gwyn. So it's an ongoing battle through time, however it's very abstract in a lot of ways. The Abyss is a physical aspect of the dark that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. This war began with Artorias, who fought the Dark Wraiths and then fell to the Abyss in Ulusil, and of course this legacy is carried on today with the Farron Keep and the Undead Legion of the Abyss Watchers. So Artorias was the first one to fight the Dark Wraiths, and initially when the DLC for the first game came out, myself included, there was a little bit of confusion, and here we are on the Road of Sacrifices. There was a little bit of confusion as to the timeline, because the Father of the Abyss title that came with Manus made many people, including myself, think that it meant he was the father and that he spawned it, and I'm going to fight this really annoying giant crab here whilst I carry on. And this confused a lot of people because Artorias fell in this battle in Ulusil, and therefore it made people think that the war against the Dark Wraiths that happened obviously in New Londo might not have happened or could not have happened if that was the agreed timeline. However, with the Ring City, it has been all but confirmed that the Abyss has existed since time immemorial, and is essentially a primordial aspect of the Dark, along with the Dark Soul. If we read the description for the Ringed Knight armour, it says this: "The armour of early men was forged in the Abyss, and betrays a smidgen of life. For this reason, the gods cast a seal of fire upon such armour." So at this time the Abyss was known of by the gods. It was obviously formed at the same time that the Dark Soul was formed. However, it wasn't as feared as it is now, and I seem to have an invader here, so let's see how this goes. Probably going to die. So the Abyss was formed at the beginning of time, and it probably wasn't as feared back then because the dragons were of course a bigger issue at that point. And I'm just, trying to concentrate against this watchdog here. And the dragons were of course the bigger issue, so the kind of dangers of the Abyss would not become kind of the concentration of the gods until later. And this is when Artorias and Gwyn, who trembled at the dark, began to wage war against the Abyss. And I might cut this out guys, because I am obviously going to be concentrating a lot more on this than in fact on the lore. But now that we've got the timeline sorted, we can say that this happened. That the Dark Wraiths of New Londo in fact did exist before the events of Ulusil. But then, there we go. GG. So, I'm back guys after that first invasion which I won, but now I can concentrate on the chat. So, as I was saying, the timeline now is a little bit clearer with the Ring City DLC, in that we can see that Artorias was able to fight the Wraiths of New Londo because the Abyss has existed since the beginning of time. Manus was not the progenitor of the Abyss in general, in fact he was just the father figure of that Abyss, or like a clerical type father of that Abyss in Ulusil, and was the reason for the collapse of Ulusil, if nothing else. So for me the timeline goes like this. The dragon war is waged, so the dark isn't as much of a concern, although they do fear it enough to mark the armour with these rings and seals of the god. They then use the power of the Abyss with the humans against the dragons, because they are the greater threat to the gods at this point. The Age of Fire flourishes and not much else happens then. But the dangers of the dark and the abyss only become apparent when the fire fades. Cath tells us that Gwyn trembled at the dark. So eventually he'll have realised that his dynasty, his Age of Light that he'd fought so hard for, was in fact in danger. And the fall of New Londo will certainly have helped his opinion of that. And this is when Artorias of the Abyss will have began his fight against the Abyss. He'll have made a covenant with the beasts of the Abyss, probably one of the primordial serpents, maybe not Cath or maybe not Frampt, but one of them, able to traverse the Abyss, and began hunting them. Then the events of Ulasil happened. Manus was awoken from his slumber by the careless citizens of Ulasil, egged on by probably Cath, and once that happened, Artorias was once again dispatched after having fought the Dark and the Abyss for some time, and then he brings his fight to Ulasil while he ultimately perishes. And that is of course the story of Artorias in a kind of nutshell, and the beginning of this war on the Abyss. And the Abyss was of course a great source of fear for the gods, for many reasons, and understandably, if you see what happens in Ulasil, you can understand why they are so afraid of this physical manifestation of the Dark. And then this legacy is fast forwarded to Dark Souls 3, where we are now, and where we're about to kind of enter. But before entering there, I'm just going to kind of explore the rest of this area, guys. I'm going to carry on talking about Farron and the Abyss Watchers, but I'm still going to try and explore this area and get all the items that I can. Oh, these crabs. I'm just going to back out this deep water here. And so, fast forward to the Undead Legion, and we see that this very much is Artorias' legacy in a lot of ways. They are committed to the same fight that he is. And we learn from their lore that they swear upon the wolf blood. And as I get eaten by this crab, I'll just read my notes a little bit. So what is interesting is that they are committed to hunting the Abyss, and they are in Farron. So of course this means that the swamp that we visit down below, that I'm about to visit soon, is in fact prevalent with the creatures and the forces of the Abyss. And we do see this because of course the most obvious sign of this is that we see the Dark Wraiths. And the Dark Wraiths being here is a great sign that of course the forces of the Abyss are here. Not only that, we see that the Gru are very much corrupted by the Dark. Now if you didn't know this, the Gru are in fact a kind of facet of the Undead Legion. The black bug pellet tells us that they are the descendants of the Acolytes of the Undead Legion. And for me, I feel like these are descendants of the Acolytes who once lived here, who were probably relatively normal. But in fact, their exposure and the fact they've lived here and raised here their whole life has made them kind of susceptible to the corruption of the Dark, which is why they appear very much like the creatures we see in Ulasil, who are humans whose humanity has gone mad. And I suggest that's something similar, maybe a little bit more kind of insidious, that's happened to the Gru. And not only that, you see the Elder Gru, and they are able to lift up these big tree staffs and actually use it to fire kind of dark magic at us, which again implies that they have again been corrupted by the Dark. So we can see that the corruption of the Dark is very much present in the swamp. There's also the kind of presence of the dead mushroom guys, and to me this suggests that it's possible that this area is or once was Ulasil, but that is completely open to debate, and it could be that these mushrooms find themselves in similar places that the Abyss does, maybe to fight it. I'm not entirely sure. Your speculation on that is completely welcome, but it is no kind of coincidence that the mushroom guys' bodies are there, because they are very reminiscent of Ulasil and Darkwood Garden. So the Legion and all its facets are the inheritors of that fight that Artorias started a long time ago. And so if we directly kind of look at some of the lore connected with these kind of bodies in the Legion, we can see that it is in fact the inheritors of the Wolf Knight known as Artorias. So there is the Undead Legion, but the Undead Legion fell. And after that there is the Covenant known as the Watchdogs of Farron. And to me the Watchdogs of Farron are another aspect of the Legion, but they have a different role. And their role is to guard over the restful dead, the resting dead in this area, because of course it is a corrupted area, and the dead should not be awoken in this area. So let's read the covenant item, the swordgrass that you get there. And its item description reads this: long ago, the swordgrass leaf quietly identified members of the Undead Legion, again showing the connection between the Undead Legion and this covenant. In the rotted forest rest the spirits of warriors past. Their acceptance and gratitude towards the Guardians is expressed eloquently by this humble leaf. And it says that the leaf is a duty fulfilled by the watchdogs of Farron, who stand beside the old wolf to ensure serenity of those at rest. So for me, they are two different bodies, but of course it's another one of the facets of the Keep It Farron. They all have the same objectives. They are watching over the abyss. And the watchdogs of Farron have taken over now that the Legion has fallen to disrepair and essentially fallen to darkness, and that's why they're now eternally fighting each other. And so the watchdogs of Farron swear their oath on the old watchdog of Farron. And of course the watchdog is very symbolic of Artorias, the first Abyss Avenger, if you like to call him that. Not only was he the Wolf Knight, but his closest companion, Sif, was a great wolf. The covenant item associated with the watchdogs of Farron, so I'm just standing here after I've killed the Black Knight while I carry on chatting about this, further states they have a pact with this old wolf. The wolf seems dead now, but it again, of course, harkens back to Artorias, showing that the watchdogs are part of that inheritance of his, of this kind of unending war. The sign of the wolf is the sign of this unending war with the abyss. The Legion and the watchdogs essentially worship the Artorias legacy, and it is seen as the kind of basis for their belief system. Now, the Undead Legion of Farron, I could go on about them for ages, but let's just kind of summarise the lore. So their lore essentially suggests that they swear their oath on either, and it's open to interpretation, Sif's blood or Artorias' blood. Either way, it gives a direct connection between their soul and the soul of Artorias/Sif, making them completely direct inheritors of their battle. And so that's what the watchdogs and the Legion's role is. They are carrying on this battle of the abyss. And in Dark Souls 3, the abyss is having manifestations in Farron's keep, which is why the keep is founded on top of it, to keep their enemies under wraps. And let's see if there's anything else in this ember that I've just picked up here that's quite useful. Yeah, not much. Not a huge amount of lore there. So that's what I've got to say about that, is that Artorias became the symbol for the fight across the ages against the abyss. Not the dark, specifically the abyss I'm talking about, and its physical manifestations. So the wolf and Artorias, whatever that might be, became the symbol of defiance against the abyss. So that's kind of what I want to touch on that today. So I'll move on from that to Q&A. But I hope you find it as interesting as I do that, of course, this battle that started by Artorias in the original game, which has always been a fascinating subject, against the physical abyss, is carried on by these warriors who take his symbol of the wolf and the symbol of Sif as their own symbol and their own pact. Now, moving on to the Q&A, I've got some really interesting Q&As. Whilst we soak in the delightful view of the keep here, I'm going to read my first Q&A question, which comes from Humble Gamer. So Humble Gamer says, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the untenanted graves now that we know that Pontiff Sullivan was supposed to be fought here as the final boss of the game under the name Old King of the Eclipse. So I'll talk about the untenanted graves for sure, and I'll pass a comment on this deleted content. I don't like kind of forcing the deleted content onto it because things have obviously changed. Pontiff Sullivan completely changed character, but my thoughts on the untenanted graves do kind of reflect what this removed content suggests anyway. So for in-game content, I believe that it is pretty much confirmed that the untenanted graves are in the past. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this little mask over here that helps with poison. But the untenanted graves are in the past, and the reason that I think this is for a number, but the main is a dialogue that comes from Ludlith of Corland, which I'll read after I've killed these gross slugs. And his dialogue reads as follows. once you find the eyes, unintended graves, apologies, it says, "Ah, found her, did we? And the black eyes that shimmer within, I see." So he's referring to the eyes and the corpse that we found the eyes on. "'Tis as if it were yesterday. We did all we could to spare her from them. Much has happened since." So, this is the past for him. So, it suggests a number of things. First of all, it confirms that what I think, that the Untainted Graves is another past version of the Firelink Shrine that we find ourselves in. Let me just equip my poison gear here. Let's see if I can upgrade my... Is the Fallen Knight an upgrade? Weight-wise it is, so we're probably just going to stick that on. Alright. So yeah, the Untainted Graves for me are in the past, and Ludwig seems to suggest this, that he and his followers, whoever they were, back then were opposed to the idea of the dark, whereas this firekeeper who had these eyes was attempting to let the fire go out, which to me is what this area is, the Untainted Graves. It's a dark area because this is a world where the light is all but gone out. And then, to me, making a huge kind of lore jump here, Ludwig will have probably linked the fire in this world, which is why the way it is. And I'm going to kind of move out now while I continue to talk. However, that dialogue is kind of pretty strong evidence as it isn't the only bit that I kind of refer to when I think that this is something that's happened in the past. There's also the fact that Grundyr's here. And this is Grundyr before he becomes the version that we fight at the beginning of the game, the Judge version. His soul reads as follows, and I'm just going to look at my notes here. Grundyr, or the Belated Champion, was bested by an unknown warrior. He then became sheathed to a coiled sword, in hopes that someday the first flame would be linked once more. So this is the kind of time-travelling stuff that we experience in Dark Souls 2. In Dark Souls 2, the first boss you fight, the Last Giant, is actually one of the last bosses you fight in the game when you travel back in time, the Giant King, or he was originally the Giant King. Of course, this is my speculation based on the way he looks and the fact it seems to react very violently to you when you approach him in the beginning of the game, like he remembers you from the past or our future. And so this is the type of time-travelling stuff we get with Grundyr as well. His soul says that he was bested by an unknown warrior, and of course that unknown warrior is in fact us. And it then goes on to say he becomes a sheath to the coiled sword. So this defeat in the past, where we are now in the Untainted Graves where we fight him, comes before the coiled sword gets inserted into him, as we see him at the beginning of Dark Souls 3's opening. So if that isn't enough evidence for you, I'm not sure what is. Of course, you could just interpret it that it's some kind of weird parallel world. But remember that, annoyingly, Dark Souls has this kind of time thing, and a lot of people don't like it. I don't mind it. But time doesn't work in the same way that it does in the real world. And so you might also ask why, geographically, it's attached to Lothric Castle behind the secret garden of this consumed king. And my answer to that would be is that we're at the end of days, and the opening cinematic to Dark Souls 3 makes it very clear that lands from all different times and places are all coming together. So it's not inconceivable then that another Firelink Shrine from another point in history also makes its way towards Lothric. And that is why it's geographically next to us. We step into the past as well as stepping into a new area. It also quite easily explains then how the Queen of Lothric visits it. For those who didn't know, there's a hidden blessing. I'm just going to put this out. There's a hidden blessing in the Untainted Graves, and the description of the hidden blessing, as far as I remember, I haven't actually checked it before this, it essentially says that she used to come and visit this grave to see the warriors who are at rest and give them comfort. So she's from the future, yet she goes back into the past, geographically, and also on the timeline. You know, Dark Souls has always been a bit kind of malleable when it comes to timeline, so it doesn't bother me too much, this. So yeah, I feel like it's a tacked on time jump, and that's what I think about it. Now, commenting on that cut content you mentioned, I still think that it's possible that the Untainted Graves were still a different time period, but I would say it was still going to be in the past, given the name of the boss that was cut, Old King, and that you'd go back and he was essentially a Lord of Dark who let the fire go out or usurped the fire and took the fire for himself, and became the Lord of Dark, Lord of the Eclipse. I think that's what that name implies, and old again suggests that it happened in the past, much like I suspect it does. Suspect words. And so that's my kind of thoughts on the Untainted Graves. Is there something that belongs in the past? And the cut content would have also played into that. Maybe not the exact, we wouldn't have accessed it the exact same way, I don't know. We could have travelled back through some other mechanic and taken essentially the soul of the Dark Lord. And that's what it means to me. And I hope that gives you some answers, Humble Gamer. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is by Riverson Grey. And he says, it made me really happy hearing you talk about Dark Souls 2. I think if they had called it by a different name and said it's set loosely in the Dark Souls world, it wouldn't have caught so much flack. So he's essentially asking for my thoughts on this game, and I'm happy to address this. Of course, it's not a lore point. I know it's Lazy Sunday lore, but you know, it's just a casual talk, so we can talk about anything, and that's Dark Souls 2 included. So I'm just going to start by saying I'm not a Dark Souls 2 hater, so I'm not just going to kind of dump on it just for the sake of it. I actually think there's a lot of good in it. Of course, I think there's a lot of bad in it. It is still my least favourite out of the series, and it's just reality-wise, it's the one I play the least. Man, those jumping guys are so annoying sometimes. Apologies. And so I'm going to kind of start with, briefly, what I think people could perceive to be its failings, and then I'll talk about the positives, which I'll end on a positive note. So, just to summarise, I think overall it's positive. It adds a lot of good lore. From a lore perspective, certainly it adds a lot of good lore, in my opinion. Is it the best gameplay-wise? Probably not, or design-wise? Probably not. But that doesn't mean it's not a great game that adds a lot to the universe. So, with that being said, I'll talk about kind of one of the major feelings that then kind of fed into everything else and exacerbated all the other issues. And that was the pre-game overhype. The game had the biggest, most aggressive marketing campaign out of all three of the games. I mean, this is my opinion, of course, but I think it's true. It's the one I still remember the most today. I don't really even remember that much about Dark Souls 3's marketing campaign, in all honesty. But Dark Souls 2 marketing campaign was really hyped, really pumped. The cinematic they had for the announcement trailer was amazing. No one can deny that. It's not an amazing trailer. Where he walks through while there's a voice talking over the top, and then he ends up getting basically killed by a dragon at the end. It is incredible, and he fights all those cool mannequin enemies that didn't make it into the game thanks to copyright issues. So it had these amazing trailers, and not only that, but it had a lot of pre-release gameplay that oversold the graphics and made them look better than the final product, which is always a huge no-no with a lot of people. For me, it's not a big deal, because graphics never what I really cared about that much in Dark Souls, but of course I understand why people get annoyed at this. It was massively overpromised. You could probably look at some comparison videos on YouTube if you want to check this out, if you're not familiar with Dark Souls pre-release. But yeah, there's a lot of huge improvements according to their pre-release gameplay footage, and it was obviously played on a developer build of some really high-end machine that they couldn't replicate for the mass console market. And I'm not talking little graphical difference, I'm talking huge. Like I think even the pre-release gameplay of Dark Souls 2 looked better than Dark Souls 3 is now. I don't know what it was. Is like they'd done some work on that pre-release build, and it looked amazing, and a lot of people were really pumped for it. And it also had this lighting system that Dark Souls 2 never really managed after it being hyped so much, and you could really see the change in light if you used torches and when you lit the bonfire. And then what we got was a lot more flat compared to what was promised. And so that overhype didn't help the issues that Dark Souls 2 had. And if the overhype hadn't happened, I don't think many people would have been that bothered about the issues it had, or issues wouldn't have been issues, because the graphics became an issue because of these pre-hype. So, that's one. This bother me, but I understand why it bothers people. Overpromising is not good in this industry. Secondly, this is the failing for me when it comes to why I don't play it as much as the others. It's not the direction, not the lore, not anything like that, the reasons I don't go back to it as much. It's just the gameplay is very, very different from the rest of Dark Souls. So Dark Souls 3 and Dark Souls 1 feel similar. Dark Souls 3 is of course a lot faster game than Dark Souls 1. But what I mean by they feel the same is they've got this weight to it, weight to the combat, weight to the movement. I'm just going to grab this undead bone shard and kind of get out of here. We're going to go back to the Firelink Shrine and upgrade our flasks. So, oh, I missed an Estes shard, didn't I, quite early on? Oh well. We'll go back and get that actually. So yeah, the gameplay is what's the biggest issue for me. It's a lot more weightless. There's a lot more floaty combat. So in Dark Souls 1 and 3, the combat feels really tight, and you usually feel that if you die, it's your fault because you didn't get it quite right. And when you hit enemies with weapons, it feels like they actually connect on time, and the enemies react, they stagger, you feel like you actually hit them. In Dark Souls 2, the core gameplay idea is there in that, yes, it's a third-person action game. Yes, you've got a weapon that you then hit people with, and you can dodge. But it doesn't connect the same way. There's not the weight to it that Dark Souls 1 has. It doesn't feel the same. It's a lot more weightless, and when you roll and try and dodge through things, you can get hit when you shouldn't have because you feel like you've timed it correctly. It's just that for some reason the invincibility frames and stuff are a lot weirder. The movement feels floaty. So in Dark Souls 3 and 1, and this is my personal opinion of course guys, you feel like you're connected to the ground, you feel like you're a character walking on the surfaces that you're experiencing. In Dark Souls 2, you feel like your character is essentially just a computer generated character that's floating over the surface of the world, especially when you're locked on. When you lock on and you start cycling around people, it just feels so floaty. So that's kind of the biggest issue for me. I still love playing the game, and especially at the time, it's just in retrospect I feel this. I loved it a lot. So that's another kind of main feeling for me. And that is honestly the biggest one for me. The rest of the ones that I'm listing are just things that I see people have an issue with, and I understand that they do. So moving on to that, another one is that Dark Souls 2 has some great areas, beautiful lighting. Each individual area is gorgeous. Some of them are amazing areas. Some of my favourite in the game, in all the series in fact. It's just that they don't fit together in an overarching world. So in Dark Souls 3, yes, there's vastly different areas, but I don't know how to put my finger on it, but they feel like they flow correctly, or at least they're explained why they flow together. In Dark Souls 2, you feel like the direction was given to individual artists to do this great area, and individually they did great jobs. It's just that overarchingly they were just kind of rammed together. And then you have this kind of jarring kind of transition from a poison swamp to a fiery lava valley, and it doesn't feel right, and it feels kind of forced. It feels like artificial, as Riverson Gray says, artificial Zelda world. That is quite annoying in a lot of ways. So great art direction, just not a good overarching plan as to how it was all going to fit together. And finally, another one that annoys people, and I'm going to try and grab some extra items, so I'm going to go from this bonfire here. Another thing that annoys people is the lore. Now, I'm going to just say this is the vanilla game, because I think that the DLC lore, and in fact the DLCs in general, are brilliant additions to the Dark Souls series. Some phenomenal lore, some well designed areas, and some beautiful music. And if you haven't played Dark Souls 2, buy the Scholar of the First Sin, do yourself a favour and at least get to those DLCs. They're honestly some of the most memorable in the whole series, despite like the criticisms I've just laid out. And Aldia, the Scholar of the First Sin, is an amazing character. You hear me talking about him a lot, especially in this chat series, because he is just genuinely one of the best characters in the entire game, and there's no denying that. And that comes from Dark Souls 2. But yeah, the lore in general in the kind of vanilla game, there are some great bits with Vendrick and his kingdom, but the other kingdoms feel kind of like they're playing a part of being another kingdom that fits into this Kingdom of Kingdoms, and that's it. And the lore is kind of knee deep. It's not particularly, doesn't go as far as Dark Souls 1 does or Dark Souls 3 does in a lot of respects, and so that is a feeling that a lot of people had with it as well. And so that's enough of the negatives. So I'll briefly go through the positives now, because overall I really do like the game. Positives, of course, the DLC add a lot to the lore and a lot to the world of Dark Souls that we should be grateful for. Aldia really is a great meta character that just adds so much to the world. He's the only one in all of the series who questions what the hell we're all doing Why are we buying into this ridiculous cycle? What are we doing? What is the point in it? Will it change anything? These hard questions are only asked by one person in the entire game, and that's Aldia. So Aldia himself is a great part. As I said, individual areas and art direction is phenomenal. It just doesn't fit together as it should. Sorry, I'm trying to heal myself with poison whilst I'm trying not to get cursed. And finally, the music in Dark Souls 2 is great. There's some great pieces in Dark Souls 2 that's, I mean, again, primarily the DLC, which really is, honestly, the best part of the game. The DLC is so well thought out. But the music in the DLC, Sir Alon's theme is one of the best pieces in the entire series and still stays with me. Same with the Ivory King and the Ivory King fight in general. It's amazing. So overall, I was glad for Dark Souls 2. It added some good lore, like the cyclical nature of the world. We get that in Dark Souls 2. So to surmise, there's some good individual art, some great music, some great boss designs. The DLCs are amazing, amazing DLCs. And overall, there's some good lore points that come out of Dark Souls 2. It's just that it feels like, I think Zelda's a good description, River St. Grey, because you kind of nail it on that it's like this different world area that's still somehow connected, but doesn't feel like it should be connected. If you played Demon Souls, this is the same in Demon Souls, except that they're not connected in Demon Souls, so it feels fine. You just warp to different areas from the kind of hub area, and it makes quote-unquote sense. In Dark Souls 2, they ram it all together, and it just doesn't work sometimes, and it's quite jarring. So yeah, that's what I think about Dark Souls 2. And I have a lot more kind of Q&A questions, but I think I want to leave them for next week and kind of leave the episode when I reach this little mushroom here. And again, this is what I was talking about. There's a lot of mushrooms, which again suggest that this is possibly Ulasil, or at least it again suggests the similarities between this place and Ulasil, in that there is the dark and that there is an abyss force rising. So I'm just going to end with that lore point into this cave. This is quite a good little cave for me to hang out in while I kind of end the video. And so I hope you guys liked my discussion on the kind of legacy of Artorias, as well as the Q&A questions I had there. So if you like this series, I'll be back next week with another one. I'm working on quite a big piece for my next formal lore video, so I'm not sure how long it will take, but stay tuned, it's going to be a really good one. But if you like this, please hit a like and subscribe for more. So thanks guys, see you next time.